All right, everybody, welcome in. My name is Joe, and today we're going to talk about some chess. So this is a game I got to play pretty recently, and I'm showcasing it for a few reasons. Number one, it's a 10+0 game. It's a little bit faster time format than what I normally play. The idea being that you know when the game's going to end. It's 10+0, you know it's going to be no longer than 20 minutes, 10 for each side. Normally I play 10+5 or 15+10 games, a little bit longer. Gives you that 5 or 10 second increment, so as the game moves into an end game, you're not scrambling as much. You do have a little bit of think time built into the moves, so it's a little bit more to give you a chance to think through those moves, and you're not just blindly pushing pieces. Because the whole goal of this, remember, is for us to get better at chess and to think through our moves. All right, so in this case, I led off with knight to f3, the Reti system, right? So really flexible opening. My opponent responded knight f6, also extremely flexible. So neither one of us have committed at any point in time, at this point in time, to what we're actually going to play, which gave me an option to decide what do I want to play. And you know what? I haven't played any Queen's Gambit games in a while, so I figured why not? Let's do it. So I pushed c4 and tried to transition this game back into a Queen's Gambit. My opponent played e6, I pushed d4, and then d5. We're now in a Queen's Gambit declined line. In fact, my very next move, knight c3, we can see, yeah, here's the opening. Queen's Gambit declined. We are truly in a Queen's Gambit system. When I was focusing on the Queen's Gambit, this is the move order I started playing. I just found it to be a little bit more flexible in case my opponent played something completely different. But this is what I traditionally found myself playing, this move order. Instead of, you could open a Queen's Gambit, right, or excuse me, someone leads off with d4, you could go d5 immediately, and then they push c4, I didn't go back far enough, d4, d5, and then c4, and now this is a true Queen's Gambit. You can decline it by pushing the e-pawn, and then knight to c3, and then knight to f6. This is kind of what we ended up into, except we win it from a slightly different move order. In the past, when I was focusing on the Queen's Gambit, I would recommend this move order anyway. You end up in the same spot, but it does give you a little bit of flexibility. But in this particular game, we started off with the flexible opening, and then we transitioned into the Queen's Gambit declined. The only difference here is one of the reasons why I started playing this Reti system, and in fact, both for black and for white, you find me now playing more King's Indian games, is because I like the idea and the strengths behind this fianchettoed bishop right in front of our king. When we castle kingside and we've got that fianchettoed bishop, that ends up being the King's Indian systems. I found myself playing these games because I liked the games that ended up when you had this fianchetto. So that's kind of the idea I would go for, which then made me realize, you know what, I'm actually playing a King's Indian. Why don't I go study the King's Indian? And that's how we now have videos on King's Indian. But by playing this move order the way I did here, instead of immediately going for g3 and then bishop to g2, instead of immediately doing that and going for this Queen's Gambit, that does mean that you have to be flexible. I may not be able to do my fianchetto. And in fact, this game, my opponent immediately captured. Now I can't well, I could fianchetto, but one of the themes of the Queen's Gambit is you just grab back with your bishop, and then you park your bishop, and you've got control of this diagonal. And that's perfectly fine. I'm happy with that. Yes, I enjoy the light square fianchetto. Ooh, excuse me. Yes, I enjoy the light square fianchetto sometimes, but in this case, I'm not going to get that, and that's all right, right? So we're flexible enough to move on, and I decide, follow along with the Queen's Gambit lines that we've talked about, and in that case, what do? We push e3 or e4. In fact, e4 at this point in time is doable. The only thing attacking e4 is my opponent's knight. I've got it defended. So I'm pushing my e-pawn. I could go e3 or e4. In this case, I decided to go e3. It's a little bit more conservative. It turns out I could have gone e4, but oh well. So I went e3. From here, black's point of view, right? Black is up a pawn. It's this highly exposed, very forward c-pawn. You could try to hold on to it. It's not always the easiest to hold on to. Right, it's not the easiest to hold on to, but you can try to hold on to this pawn. But typically, if you're playing from the black side of the board and you're playing the Queen's Gambit, just let it go. You're going to spend more time trying to hold on to this pawn than it's really worth, and unless you really know what you're doing, just let it go. It's a free pawn right now anyway, so just give it back. And my opponent does that, gives it back by starting to develop, getting ready to start developing his pieces. I just quickly grab the pawn, and now I'm ready to park my bishop. This pin can sometimes be frustrating for playing from the white, especially if your opponent brings this knight around. You have to be careful that you don't get two attackers and only one defender right in front of your king. Oops, right in front of your king. However, because we prioritized development and because we did it in the move order that we did, we're home free. We can easily castle, and we don't have to worry. This pin is not really a pin. We don't have to worry about it at all. We just can continue, get castled quickly, and by going with this move order instead of the other move order, we don't have to worry about this pin at all. If our opponent takes, we could take back with the pawn, solidify our structure in place. My opponent castles, and at this point in time, it's like, okay, what's the next game plan? What are we gonna do, right? What are some themes that we want to explore? That's a great question. The one that I do know is fighting for the e4 square, right? And at this point in time, I realize, you know what, I can totally do that. My opponent is castled, so the fact that this is semi-open is not a worry anymore, so my opponent is now in a defensive stance. So I could bring my queen all the way out to b3, but there's really nothing for it to do here. So by parking on c2, number one, we clear the back row, right? We connect our rooks, and we help support the e4 pawn push, which could come in the future. My opponent develops in a very similar way, and I decided, you know what? My knight is not pinned. I've got two attackers on that square. My opponent only has one defender. I can claim that square for me. If my opponent puts another attacker on this square, I can simply rotate my rook over, which is normal in these kind of positions, and I can help support that. So I'm in a good shape. I'm happy. This knight attack here that my opponent put out. Now you notice what my opponent is looking for. Oops, I can get rid of this now. My opponent is looking for this outside attack. Unfortunately, my knight is defending that, so I really don't have to worry about it at all, right? If my opponent brings the queen in, then I just grab the queen for free. If my opponent brings the knight in, I just grab, and there's nothing there. So I don't have anything to worry about at this point in time, but there are some more tactics that we can look at. This knight is an undefended piece. Can we cut off our opponent's influence? Yes, we can. And so I spent a little time on this position trying to find out what the best move could be. Do I maybe just continue developing, right? Maybe get my bishop around like that? Do I just maybe push the A pawn? So I spent a lot of time trying to decide what I wanted to do here. But I ended up coming up with this E5 pawn move. And if we look at the engine says, wow, 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 wow. White is way up. So just from, if we go back a little bit, just from here, right? So this is just a standard everyday opening, very evenish type position. This attack, like I said, doesn't do anything. So I just castle, and white has a slight lead here, just positionally. Material is dead even, but positionally white has a slight lead according to the engines. Just continue developing. But this move here is a very bad move for black. It's an undefended piece here. We've got an undefended piece here. And I spent a while trying to decide, you know, just ignore them and just develop at my own pace. But this E5 move, I'm very proud of it. It is the engine's top recommendation. It cuts off the influence. If the knight wants to try to make a sacrifice, I've still got this covered multiple times. I'm perfectly safe. It's not attacking anything, but it is cutting off the queen, so this sure as heck ain't gonna happen. And so at this point in time, I have now built up enough of an advantage that all I have to do is not screw it up, right? So my opponent continues developing, I continue to develop. Now that I've got access to this square, I park my bishop there. this does become a little bit of a liability because it's an undefended piece. What do we talk about? Undefended piece, undefended piece, undefended pieces everywhere in this game. Nothing's attacking them yet, but that can always change. So this bishop probably needs to get rotated back, get defended one way or the other. I am, at this point in time, looking at, well, geez, it'd be nice if I could push this pawn and open up an attack on that queen, but that's neither here nor there. Now, my opponent is attacking my bishop, so the question is, what do I do with that bishop? Well, the purpose was always to bring that bishop back to come along this diagonal, but being flexible, right? That's what these games are all about, being flexible and looking at how the board has changed as we've been playing. This knight is not defending that outside pawn, so I slide my bishop back and I put pressure along this outside, along this outside pawn. Now, right now I'm threatening to take it, but my opponent can defend that in any number of a million ways. Not with the knight anymore, though, not unless he wants to give up material. But he simply pushes his g-pawn, and so this attack is blunted, but that was never the point. The point was just to start forcing my opponent into a bad position, right? So we've weakened some squares even more. This knight is almost trapped. In fact, if I look at it some more, let me think. At the time, I didn't spend a whole lot of time on this too much, but is this knight completely trapped? Yes, indeed. The knight is trapped, so I probably should have pushed my h-pawn. And let's look at what the engine says that I should be doing. Nope. Engine says don't even worry about it. Engine says you've got enough of an advantage. Keep developing, keep developing, keep developing. The engine wants me to rotate knight around here. I didn't go that route. What I saw was this weakness, right? So I saw this. Now that these two pawns are pushed, this f6 square is extremely weak. Nothing can shake anything loose from this, except for the dark square bishop, which is way down here. And so my thought process was, you know, it'd be nice if I could rotate this knight up to this beautiful square, which is nicely defended. And if my opponent were to rotate back, I can stick my bishop here and defend it that way. So that was my goal. The engine, look at the engine. The engine wants me to come back this way with the knight. For some reason, I don't quite understand where it wants this knight to go. I don't know. Yeah, I'm not sure what this knight's role would be. Maybe it just wants to open up the queen. I'm not sure. So, like I said, sometimes I don't quite understand exactly what the engine wants me to do, but that's neither here nor there. Either way, my goal was, notice this pin has not been a pin at all the whole game, and so I was able to quickly rotate my knight up with a goal, and yes, right, this square is defended. But who cares, right? Now my opponent makes a really good move. Notice that I cannot capture because my bishop is undefended. My pawn is pinned, so I can't capture right away. But this does come with check. I capture, my opponent captures back. It's just an even trade. I no longer have that really great knight there, unfortunately, and I can't capture. So this is where Big Brain Joe comes in. You guys ready for this? This is a good one. So if you were playing this, what would you do? Well, I saw I had one piece under attack if this bishop weren't there. So where can I move this bishop to make sure that I can now open up this attack? All of that came, this whole strategy came because my opponent had to push this central pawn. Because they pushed and they weakened these squares, and that's kind of what the themes that we've been talking about lately, that I've been trying to focus on myself, is not really looking at just one piece or one pawn or you know, what the actual pieces on the board are, but start looking past the pieces to the squares themselves. And these squares, we weakened them, right? Or my opponent weakened them. They were weak squares, and now they were targets. And now by placing my dark square bishop here, I have two things under attack. My opponent really can't save both. If he saves the knight, which he could do any number of ways, right? And notice I have some weaknesses, right? This is a weak square. I don't have any pawns here, so if this knight ended up over here on d5, I would have no real good way of dislodging it. But if he saves the knight, he drops an exchange. If he saves the rook, he drops a knight. And so that's what my opponent did. My opponent saved the rook, and I picked up the knight. And now I have the possibility of sticking a bishop, a defended bishop right here, all because these dark squares are super weak, and I was able to get my pieces in on them. So I control a lot of space in front of my opponent's king right now. That makes me happy. And from here, I feel like I'm in a really good position. And if my opponent, I don't understand this move, honestly. I don't know what the goal was here. I'll be honest, I don't get what this move was for. I think the idea was, well, he's gonna move this bishop at some point and then start pushing this pawn and, you know, try to eliminate one of my threats, maybe. But again, when we look at weaknesses, I saw there was another weakness. Now, this pawn can't go anywhere until my opponent removes my white pawn. So we've locked this pawn out of the way, and there's no pawn on the d file, so this knight is now a pretty big boy knight, right? This knight is, she's doing lots of work. I started from here, and I know it doesn't look like it, and I know you just have to take my word for it, but I was really looking at some sacrifices, thinking that maybe I had a big attack, because if you look at how my pieces are laid out, I've got crazy bishops, I've got a crazy knight, my queen is already backing up everything. I have a serious attack happening, and unfortunately my opponent's pieces are nowhere near defending. The queen is really the only thing that's part of the defense, and everything I have, excluding my rooks, is involved in attacking. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4 attackers going right at my opponent's king, and my opponent really only has 1 defender looking at his king. And so I started looking for some sacrifices. What happens if I were to, let me let my opponent make their next move. And this pawn push, I get it. Like, I get kind of what he's trying to do, but now he's locked in. Both his bishops are kind of blocked in. If he was going to push, if they were going to push c5, they probably should have put their bishop here on b7 maybe, and so, you know, open up the bishop in the process. I'm not certain. I'm not in my opponent's head, so I don't know what they're thinking. But from here, I was looking at what happens if I sacrifice. And I'm not good enough to be able to see far enough ahead to know if this is a good thing or not, right? My opponent can grab. I still can't grab here, but is this something? Is this a possible mating net? Notice if my opponent blocks, that's immediately checkmate. And then from here, the king only has 1 square. Now, I don't have checkmate just yet, but we do have some, I mean, there's a lot. I mean, this is very close to checkmate, isn't it? It feels so close to checkmate, and I'm just not where I can see it yet. So something like this, notice the king can't come up. The king only has 1 legal move, or capture with the queen. And again, I just don't know how to finish. I don't see how to finish this. Unless you come back and you end up repeating moves. And if you go with the queen, well, then the king wiggles out, and yes, you've traded off the queens, but you also sacrificed in the process, so I couldn't quite see it. But I knew there had to be something here. This just felt like there's something here with all of this. So what if I were to attack here? Well, then the queen just captures, and then there's really nothing here. And look, it's a double attack, so you have to trade off the queens. And now yes, I can defend this pawn, but, again, you sacrifice to start the attack. Whereas from here, I'm up material. I'm up a full piece at this point in time. I am up a full piece, and so sacrificing 1 piece for an attack, that's totally fine. sacrificing 2 pieces for an attack. I just didn't see it. Let's turn on the engine and take a look. The engine says the top 2 moves, yeah, some of the top moves is a sacrifice right here along this diagonal. And if we look at it, well, here's one. Here's a move that I didn't even anticipate. The F pawn is a big boy pawn, and that comes with check. This is already cut off for the opponent, so if you come with check, you've either got one move, give up the queen, or move the king out of the way. And now you're in a forced checkmate pattern. Notice this is defended, so I could easily, even something as simple as this, pick up a rook, which is still winning. Even with something like this, though, notice if your opponent takes back and you end up in that position that I said feels like something, well, sure enough, it is a forced checkmate. And it's that pawn. Now this pawn becomes deadly because of all the other threats. And realistically, the best thing for the opponent is just to trade away your queen. Goodbye, queen. If the opponent does anything else, let's say any kind of dumb move, well, checkmate in 1 because you're blocking off the queen's influence. Checkmate in 1 because you're blocking off the defender. So this pawn is so important because it blocks off the only defender in the game. And I couldn't spot that over the board, and I didn't see it. It's a cool move, though. I wish I would have seen it, because that's so cool. Just pushing that pawn, game over. The best move for the opponent to try to stay in the game is just to sacrifice their queen. Yeah, look at this. Even something like this is ridiculous. The king has no moves. It's the only thing the queen can do. Oh, dirty, dirty, dirty. Those are all covered. I mean, come on. So I was close and I knew there was something there, but I'm not good enough at spotting those deep lines. So I'm gonna leave the analysis on for a second because I want you guys to see where this game goes, because it took a turn. So I'm up. Let me look at this. Look at this. As soon as my opponent makes this c-pawn push, the moves are go for the sacrifice, which I saw at the time, or I decided to chase this bishop around. Now my opponent retreated the bishop. I thought that maybe I could trap the bishop, or at least maybe open an attack. Notice this is an undefended bishop as well. I thought maybe I could get somewhere. But this counterattack, and now we have to look at something. There's a lot more happening here than just these bishops, right? The board has changed significantly. If I take and my opponent takes, well, that's dropping a full queen. So this pawn is pinned. I have an undefended pawn. That pawn is the only thing defending that knight. Got to keep an eye on that. Oh yeah, let's not forget that my bishop is still hanging out here undefended. So I grab knowing that my opponent cannot grab. So this, now I'm up 2 full pieces. This is obviously winning. In anybody's playbook, this is winning. My opponent can't grab because he hangs a queen. But he does grab this pawn. And now the queen is threatening to pick up my knight. It was at this point in time that I should have gone for the sacrifice. I am going to drop a piece. So what do you do when you drop a piece? You try to get the most for it possible. So something like sacrificing is an option there. You're gonna lose the piece anyway, so might as well at least grab a pawn in the process. And since you've still got 4 attackers on the king side and your opponent only has 1 defender, that's kind of a strategy that we could have gone for. So I'm kicking myself for not going for the sacrifice. Notice too now that both of our queens are hanging. If my opponent grabs the bishop here, there's 2 attackers, only 1 defender, right? If I drop the knight. So if I drop the knight, I lose a defender on the bishop. if he were to, let's say I make, well, I'll show you what I made. Over the board, I made rook to d1 to add another defender here, knowing that I'm going to drop that knight. But I've now got this defended. But if I hadn't done that, let's say I made another dumb, let's say I did something like this. Opponent grabs, 2 attackers, no pin, undefended queen. I'm going to drop a second piece. The only way for me to add another defender would be to bring this guy back, and then I'm dropping this pawn and dropping a full piece. So I'm giving back 2 pieces when I'm up 2 pieces. So that being said, I decided to go ahead and start defending this bishop. If my opponent grabs here, we can, I can take his queen. So he can't do that right away. He's going to have to grab with the rook. Then I can grab with my rook, and again, he can't take unless he takes. So he has to grab the knight first. And by doing it this way, by setting up this way, I can at least get my bishop out of the way. So I'm saving my bishop, and I'm giving back the knight. So a little frustrating here because I was up 2 pieces, and I could have gone for the sacrifice. Notice I can't move this knight and defend the bishop. I would love to be able to do that, but I can't. There's no square for this knight to be able to jump backwards and defend the bishop. So I defended my bishop this way. My opponent grabbed the knight. I should have moved my bishop here, but I went for this instead, solidifying this pawn. I mean, my opponent's king can't go anywhere. It's fully trapped. Maybe there's some back row issues that I can take advantage of, but look at the analysis now. We're back to an even game. My opponent went from down 2 pieces to an even game. Went from basically checkmate on the board to even. Frustrating. All right, so now let's continue on. My opponent slides the rook over. Now his rook is into an attack and defense, so he's adding pieces to the defense of his king. I have 1, 2, 3 attackers. He's got 1, 2 defenders. He can easily bring over another defender. Maybe not that far. Maybe he can get it over here somewhere. Maybe that rook is not going to get into the game very quickly. My bishop is still hanging, so I go for what's called danger levels, a concept that Gotham Chess uses. Yes, he's attacking my bishop, but I'm attacking his rook. The rook is more valuable, therefore he has to respond to that. Plus, it means that I cut off the queen's influence. The rook comes back. My rooks are defended, so I can move my bishop out of the way. Oh, actually, I go for more danger level stuff, but I have to remember that this comes with an attack on my queen, so it's not a danger levels issue. Grab here threatens my queen, so I have to move the queen out of the way. Maybe not there. I have to move my queen out of the way, and then he can still move. He has time to move his queen out of the way, so there's not really a danger levels there. So I screwed up on this one, and luckily my opponent didn't catch it, that he could danger level me right back. But I decided to attack here, and now we see an alignment issue. So my bishop can finally get into the game and do some things. So now I'm back on top. Whew. We're back on top. My opponent drops. I decided, so there's this, right? I can either grab or I can grab. I thought that if I grab here, my opponent could grab here, forcing me out, and then maybe there's something he could do along this open file or something. I don't know. I just decided to go ahead and simplify. I'm up material. Let's simplify. So I grabbed here first, knowing that I've still got his other rook under attack. He grabs back, I grab, so now my bishop is under attack. I have checkmate and 7 on the board. Now I see where the checkmate is. I've said this earlier. There is a back rank issue. My opponent's king cannot move. He's got back rank issues. And even if he tries to push this outside pawn, he's still got back rank issues because this pawn has to go so far and the king has to go so far just to get out of the way that my opponent has back rank issues, and I see this. I'm not ready to give back my bishop just yet, so I decide to save my bishop, but I don't have to. I did not realize that I didn't have to save that. I thought that I needed this bishop still. I thought allowing my... And realistically, it's not the bishop that I'm worried about. my king is in a fianchetto setup where the bishop would normally be hanging out in the center. In the past, I have played games where once this bishop gets out there and trades off with stuff, let's say I make a nothing move, now the queen has full influence over that long diagonal. Because I have weakened my pawns, just like my opponent did, I've weakened the squares in front of my king. Giving my opponent that long diagonal seemed like a bad idea. So losing the bishop, I'm up 7 points of material, so giving one back is not the end of the world. I'm fine with it. It wasn't about dropping a bishop, and I feel good, right? I'm down to a minute and a half left. My time is running out. I have no increment. So a minute and a half is all I've got. I can't make dumb moves or back and forth moves to get some time back. I can only use the minute 26. And so every second that goes away is a second that's gone forever. And so I was worried about this, so I figured I'll just bring my bishop back. I spent a few seconds trying to decide where to bring it back to. I even debated on coming here and just sacrificing it this way for, disrupt these pawns. But this bishop's not going anywhere. I don't want this bishop to come back into the game, so maybe bring it all the way home, maybe bring it in front of the rook. Who knows? I decided to bring it in front of the rook just to keep the pressure on here. Maybe I could sacrifice it this way if I have to. But my opponent's bishop can't get into the game this way. The queen can't come here, so he has no control over that long diagonal. I still maintain control. I am going to drop some pawns. I'm going to drop those pawns. I know that. I'm okay with that. This does mean my opponent has connected passed pawns on the outside. That's dangerous. But I just slide my rook to the open file. My opponent has to do something about it. Okay. Right now his queen is defending the open file. The only thing to prolong the game is my opponent should sacrifice their queen, and it's just a nothing move to prolong the game. This pawn push does nothing. Yes, it's defended, but this is where the action's happening. So that's a defended square. Boy, it'd be nice if I had another rook along that long file. All I'm really going to do is put my queen here. That's all I'm going to do. So when my opponent pushed his pawn, did not do anything to stop my plan. This is checkmate. I've spotted this. I know it. I've won this game. I know it's checkmate, and it's going to be a beautiful queen sacrifice. Not even a queen sacrifice, a queen trade, but I'm giving up my opponent's queen. My opponent can do nothing about it. He tries to make some space, but I'm very proud of myself that I completely spotted this. I played this in almost instantly. If you look at my clock, yeah, so once I move here, yeah, I take a couple seconds to make sure I've got it all lined up. I lose 4 or 5 seconds, but I play slow anyway, so losing 4 or 5 seconds is basically an instant move for me. As soon as my opponent played something other than, I waited 4 or 5 seconds, move, checkmate. Isn't that nice? The pawn defends the bishop defends the rook cuts off all this, the rook cuts off all this. Like I said, even if my opponent had pushed this pawn all the way up to try to make some runaway room, it still doesn't work. Grab, grab, grab. Even if we try to run away, does not have access. Well, in fact, my bishop covers that anyway. But even if my bishop wasn't here, it doesn't have access because his pawn blocks him in. The rook covers it all anyway. So this was a fun finish to a game. I am mad at myself for this sequence of events here, where I go from +10 to -1. Not happy about almost throwing the game away like that, and so I do want to study more of this middle game and see how I can make sure I don't let that happen, make sure I'm better evaluating danger levels. I am in my 2-minute warning, and the 2-minute warning does mean I have to play faster, and I don't have as much time to look and pick and choose, and so I am having to move faster, and obviously that's a problem. I don't move fast, which is why I typically play longer games. But the fact that the real fact that I saw that I kept thinking to myself, there's probably a sacrifice here, makes me feel good. My instincts were right. I have started to build chess instincts. I've started to have, get that, whatever that is, that says there's something here. I don't know what it is, but there's definitely something here. 1, 2, 3, or 2, 3, 4 attackers, 5 if you count the pawn, and my opponent has 1 defender. I mean, there's got to be something there. And I didn't go for it. I was like, you know what? I don't have time to calculate all that. I'm not good enough at calculating all that. But I still went from a +11 to a -1, and then luckily my opponent missed some tactics, thankfully, and I was able to get back into the game. And then right here is where I spotted there's checkmate on the board. If I can just get a rook to this open file, there's back rank checkmate on the board. My opponent, you know, has that defended, so I've got to get another rook or a queen onto that square. And is there anything my opponent can do to stop both of my, stop my queen from getting to either one of these? Well, if he does nothing, then at least I get a queen trade and I'm still up material. Yeah, so if I were to go, let's say he makes a nothing move. And I go here. I think it's still checkmate. Yeah, still back rank checkmate. My opponent would have to start making room for his king. So there's really nothing my opponent could do to stop me from getting this open file. And I saw that, and I'm proud of myself for seeing it. I could have even, like when I was studying this, I could have even just gone here right away. Let him have the bishop, still stack up, because the only thing that's stopping me is that queen coming there, so still stack up. Nothing he can do. In fact, when you look at the engine, the best moves for my opponent is simply just throw away the queen, sacrifice the queen, and move on with life. And it's just to try to hold the game, but it's realistically checkmate. If he tries to make a hole, doesn't matter, check, check. He tries to hide, and it's checkmate. So this is a fun game, really fun. I started with the Reti opening, but we transitioned to a Queen's Gambit, and I forgot how much I enjoy the Queen's Gambit. I'll probably try to play some more. They're just fun games. This bishop on this nice long open, or this nice long diagonal is nice. I mean, it's already in a good spot. I probably will need to study when it's better. Oops, I'm not good with my arrows today, guys. When it's better to push E3 versus E4, right? Like the engine, when I looked at the engine, yeah, top move is just go push E4. Second move is E3, yes, but I could still push E4 from here and there's no harm, no foul. But I went E3, and this game developed really fun, really exciting. I'm really proud of this pawn push that I found to disassociate the queen from this long diagonal. I'm proud of myself for feeling that there was something here, right? I'm proud of myself for spotting these kind of tactics. I mean, this I felt was great, There's a piece under attack, but I'm hanging. Where can I move this bishop so that I can have this attack and do damage? Hey, look at that. Look at that. Now you got 2 pieces hanging, buddy. And my opponent saves 1, and we get into this fantastic endgame where I should have gone for the sacrifice, but maybe next time, right? There's always another game. We get to this where I almost throw it, and then transition into, yep, clean up, get to the end game that you want, and spot the checkmate pattern, just gotta deliver it, and we get there. And how cool is that? Look at that cool pattern. That's fun. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed this. This is another long analysis, but it was fun for me to kind of talk it out with you guys and let you see my thought process as well as how I go back and look at these games after the fact. I'm going to try to do more of that and try to make help myself to understand more of the themes and theories behind these positions and how we can get better and how we can have more fun games. I'll talk to you guys later. Y'all have a great one. Bye.